If there's one thing I've noticed in 9 years of covering PlayStation games and hardware, it's that the perception of PS3 has changed pretty dramatically. Nowadays, there's more reverence and appreciation for it as a platform versus 9 years ago when that wasn't really the case. So, what's going on? Let's rationalize this. Why is PS3 becoming everybody's favorite console? Let's talk about it. To be honest, there's a lot of good reasons why PlayStation 3 is taking over a lot of public mindshare. And while these reasons aren't necessarily a one-size-fits-all, there's surely a few of these things that fit the bill for why everybody loves the PS3. Whether it's one of these reasons or all of them, this is why PS3 is quickly becoming everyone's favorite console. Starting off with number 1, an entire generation grew up with it. Console life cycles typically last 4 to 5 years, though the 7th generation lasted abnormally long, with Xbox 360 in 2005 and PS3 in 2006. Their successors didn't launch until 2013, giving us a solid 7 to 8 years playing on the same machines. The earliest millennials were born around 1981, to the latest being around the mid-1990s. So technically, most millennials probably had their first gaming experience prior to PS3 and Xbox 360, but the range shows that most millennials reached a more competent age to enjoy games, generally your teen years. This is the perfect time for your average person to discover their own personal interests and hobbies, and playing video games is no doubt a hobby many fall into. A lot of people spent their middle school and high school years on PS3 and Xbox 360, and those moments stick with you for life. These are the same people who in their later years will reflect fondly on their time and what they did with it. And that's why today it's already happening. People are becoming more partial to PS3 and 360 and remembering just how good it was and what it meant to them. Which, remember, this was a longer life cycle. Not only do you have a lengthier exposure, but you can also make a case for Generation Z, people generally born in the mid-1990s to early 2010. The earliest of Gen Z probably had their first video game experience on PS3 and 360. They would be young, but old enough to play, and we all know how important that first video game experience can be. Assuming you were old enough to remember today, it's a moment that you keep with you. We're all emotionally charged creatures at the end of the day, and if you grew up with a certain games platform that led you to love games today, that might just be your favorite console. This is basically the same situation that I'm in. I'm in my late 20s now, so PS3 was not my first console. The original PlayStation was. My uncle had one, so that was my introduction to games. It's just that, ironically, playing that first was what made me want to go backwards before going forwards and playing PS2, Xbox, GameCube, and then inevitably PlayStation 3 and 360. That's the generation where, for me, I'm old enough, I'm starting to figure out more things about games and following game news and all that stuff, right? I mean, you're more competent to understand things that you otherwise wouldn't have when you're younger and just getting introduced into playing video games, right? And so for PS3, where that console, I associate it with me learning more about the games business, being fascinated by possibly pursuing a career in games, and that's kind of that's how I associate it. But I also had all those memories too, and more so, this was a generation where PS3 and 360 were doing so much more than the platforms before it. PS3 and 360 were the first truly internet-connected consoles. The PS2 and original Xbox were connected, sure, but nothing quite like PS3 and 360. These machines were the first truly online media hubs, a built-in friends list, messaging, voice chat, system-wide trophies and achievements, an online storefront. They had everything. When you really think about it, the leap from PS2 to PS3 was a massive one, not just in raw performance but also features. If you grew up on a PS3 and 360, chances are you played online, and chances are you built a friendship with many strangers or had long nighttime gaming sessions with your high school buddies. A lot of people I know today, I met from PS3 over 15-something years ago, and I know this isn't an isolated scenario. If anything, it's the norm for anyone that played back then. It's actually kind of twofold. If you grew up on PS3, there's already an easy nostalgic attachment there, but even if you're older and spent your teen years somewhere else, PS3 might edge out that favorite console title as this platform entered that connected era. It offered experiences that simply were not possible on outgoing platforms. Those late-night voice chats, downloading that new map pack for $10 that just hit the store, trying to earn all the trophies in a game to up your PSN level, these are uniquely 7th generation. For me personally, I always used to say that PS2 was my favorite console, but when I look back, some of my favorite PS2 experiences are just sort of in their own place. There's simply nothing quite like spending all night on a challenging co-op run of Portal 2, or the 30 plus hours it took for me to make a Little Big Planet level and seeing others play it, leaving nice comments. I can't speak for everyone, but I know even if you don't like Call of Duty today, chances are you loved Call of Duty 4. That's the one and only COD I ever put thousands of hours into. Not only was 2005 to 06 the first foray into this heavy online gaming landscape, but these consoles lived through a period where local storage was prevalent and then streaming took over. Think about it, PS4 launched with no way to play music, photos, or videos from an external drive. They prioritized streaming apps, whereas PS3 launched with an OS designed around storing files, with early models even having I/O for Compact Flash, Memory Stick Pro Duo, and SD. And then in the later years of PS3, it became the top streaming platform for Netflix. PS3 lived through years and generations of content delivery. Whether it was storing local files, streaming content, DVDs, or Blu-rays, it was still serving everyone's needs during that entire time. That in and of itself is impressive. For reason number 3, this is where we can get more uniquely PlayStation, because I think a large part of why PS3 is so highly regarded today is just the life cycle of the platform itself. Let's put it this way, if you were primarily playing PS3 in 2006 to 2009, you were definitely a hardcore fan. You weathered through Sony's toughest years as a console manufacturer. There is no sugarcoating the fact that PS3 launched poorly and that Xbox 360 was a great console to have instead. A lot of people left the PS2 behind for 360 and never looked back. It launched a year earlier than PS3, it was more affordable, it had more online features. By the time PS3 finally arrived, Sony was alienating their customer base by launching a very expensive piece of hardware that didn't have much software support. The early years had a lot of growing pains that showed the company the eye-watering truth that what they put out wasn't always what everyone wanted. But there were still faithful PlayStation customers who bought and played the PS3, and it's those very people who championed the system and kept it full steam ahead. These are the fans who stuck with PlayStation during one of its low points, and it stands to reason that this, coupled with the PS3's redemption story, is the reason why it's so loved today. I mean, come on, no matter what the subject matter is, everybody loves a good underdog story, or in this case, a Rocky Balboa story where he's coming back in the second half of his match against Ivan Drago. We see a veteran in the game's business getting beat on pretty good, up until Sony finally swings it around by lowering the price, releasing slim consoles, adding new features, but more importantly, putting out quality software. And that brings us to reason number 4. Unsurprisingly, it's all about the games. Actually, I should have pulled them off the shelf. Hold on. See, when I think about the PlayStation 3, I think about all the amazing exclusives we got, but also the initiatives and investment that Sony and a lot of publishers did for these titles. So remember, 2005 is when Worldwide Studios was officially formed, and that's what we know today as PlayStation Studios. But there are many franchises that started on PS3 that we can't really ignore here, major franchises. Some of these started and ended on PS3, like MotorStorm. Evolution Studios now defunct, but this is one of my favorite arcade racers. I still go back every so often and play this. Fantastic game. We had investment from second party and some of these more experimental titles like Heavy Rain. I'm not sure how well this game in particular holds up today, but back then it was very different and unique. We never had a story-based, multiple ending type game that had this high of a budget, if you know what I mean. And so nowadays, after this game coming out and then eventually Beyond Two Souls and Detroit Become Human, you know, there's more investment from publishers, more of a willingness to try those types of games. Until Dawn, as an example, and now you've got the Dark Pictures anthology. Resistance Fall of Man, a great launch title, a great franchise. Insomniac Games, now part of Worldwide Studios. Now, I have made my peace with never getting a sequel. If it happens, great, but at a minimum, can we get at least some kind of port on PlayStation 5, a collection, just bump the frame rate resolution, give me some trophies? I'll take that. 2008, Little Big Planet. This game was full of absolute magic because it didn't matter what kind of genres you were into. As long as you had a PS3, chances are you went out and bought this and played it for, you know, a small moment in time. You know, a lot of people that I knew that they only played PC stuff, but they had a PS3 on the side, or they only played Call of Duty on PS3. They went out and bought this, and we would, you know, play those bomb survival levels and just have an absolute blast. So that was such a crazy, interesting game. Metal Gear Solid 4, infamously the one game that sold many a PS3 back in the day when Kojima said you have to buy a PS3 if you want to play this game. Not a lot of people were pleased with that, but you know, this was a big part of PlayStation history, and it did move consoles for sure. Third-party stuff, you had these amazing franchises like BioShock, Dead Space. Actually, both of these of which were getting sequels eventually. BioShock has been confirmed. We have a rumor about a reimagining of Dead Space. We'll see how that pans out. We also saw a trend of HD collections, and so a lot of older franchises that are repackaged and put on newer hardware, and they were actually improved a little bit, right? So these do run at, you know, 1080p, 60 FPS. This one's 720, but you know what I mean, right? I think again, that's more of a willingness from publishers to see a proof of concept that, okay, people still want to see these games be moved over to modern platforms. So even though they're selling you games over and over and over again, the same ones, it does open those titles up to a new audience that otherwise would have had no exposure to it before, and that's something that I really appreciate. So there's just many things that started on PlayStation 3, and the library still holds up on its own, right? I mean, it's just, there's so much that we could do and talk about here, but I think that alone kind of paints a picture of why PlayStation 3 was so special. Reason number 5 really comes to most consoles with enough time, but because PS3 is now considered a retired platform, it's cheap and easy to buy for. The console sold over 80 million units, with nearly 1 billion games sold. It's pretty affordable now, though the price for rare or desirable games or desirable system configurations, those will always hold, but for the most part, you can grab certain systems for cheap and a lot of games for cheap as well. Even better, no PlayStation Plus is required to play games online, for which there are still a lot of active communities on games with the server still going, which we check up on every single year. To be honest, this is easily one of the most important reasons for a lot of people. Many second and third world countries have reasonable access to it now. Playing modern video games in these areas has never been easy or accessible by any means, but the price and availability has come down to a point where so many are finally able to get their hands on it. And that's great. With cheap games and free online, you can bet PS3 will be played for years to come, or for as long as they reasonably can. And it's also worth pointing out, we've mentioned 360 a lot because there's many similarities, but PlayStation has always had market leadership in Europe and Japan, whereas 360 saw most of its success in North America, so despite the install base of both being nearly identical, PS3 tended to resonate with more consumers on a global scale. Reason number 6 might be more specific and applied to fewer people, but you can't deny that PS3 is inherently a fascinating console. What initially caused it to be too expensive is what many people find interesting. The PS3's infamous CPU, the Cell processor, was a long-term collaborative effort with IBM and Toshiba. Sony had big plans for this processor in the long term, hoping that with enough order volume, would be adopted into a multitude of products. Instead, PS3 was the only real mass consumer device to use Cell, and with it came an abstract architecture that wasn't really suited for game development. Developers struggled to use it for years. Even Naughty Dog admits their darkest days were during the development of the first Uncharted, where many people would show up to work and say they just couldn't do it anymore. And if you remember back then, PS3 was positioned as this absolute beast of a home computer entertainment device. The entire marketing strategy was centered around explaining why PS3 was so powerful, why it was so much better at everything currently available on the market. Here's why the Cell processor is important. Here's Blu-ray disc, the new high-capacity storage medium. Here's the 6-axis motion sensing controller. All the marketing material was educational but also abstract. The White Room commercials tried to convey this sense of futuristic desire. Web and in-store presence used a lot of deep blacks with contrasting grays, reds, and even silver. It's the lanyard of consoles with a gloss black finish, contrasting silver trim, and the illusion that the product floats from certain angles. The system architect and the father of PlayStation, Ken Kutaragi, was known as Sony's Steve Jobs. He was passionate and motivated to design and create the product he felt would best deliver on his vision. And for PS3, he wanted it to push the limits and be the #1 device for every household. Ultimately, this vision is what led the PS3 to be very expensive to manufacture and difficult to develop for. And to see the platform change so much over the years, seeing developers understand the Cell processor over time, it really is fascinating. It's one of the biggest outliers in video games, and with more time comes more reverence for its history. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Looking back, I don't think we actually mentioned PlayStation Home. That's another one where, well, at the time, not many cared about it, but there was also a huge group that did, and so that would be another reason why it's your favorite. So, I mean, there's many reasons, right? But that alongside everything else, for one reason or another, I mean, I'm right there with you. I mean, nowadays, PS3, I've got, I think, 9 fat models, and then a few other slim and super slim, so yeah, it's definitely my favorite at this point for sure. But hey, if you haven't yet, please subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube, and more PS3 videos eventually. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Mystic Ryan. And that is it. I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.